Operation Wisła, otherwise known as Akcja Wisła within Poland, was the mass deportation of Lemko-Rusyns from their homes in Lemkovyna to the western parts of the now communist-controlled Polish state a few years after World War II. It started on the 28th of April, 1947, and lasted until late July of that same year. This new area the Lemkos would go to had been formerly populated by Germans, most of which were either deported or killed after the war was done. For decades after, and even today, this region is known as the Recovered Territories. In total, over 140,000 people were taken from their homeland in what was essentially the ethnocide of Lemko-Rusyns in Poland. This also marked the end to Lemkovyna as an ethnic and cultural area primarily populated by Rusyns. Some 10,000 returned in the following decades, but in all reality they make up a small percentage of the population in the modern day. But why did the Polish government do this, you may ask? Did they just have it out for Lemkos? In truth, the situation was an extremely complicated affair. In fact, it largely had little to do with Lemko-Rusyns themselves. Let me explain. The reasoning behind the mass displacement was largely due to the acts of ethnic cleansing in the years before, and numerous groups of insurgents along the border between Poland and Ukraine. One of the most famous and harrowing events in this area occurred in 1943. The organization of Ukrainian nationalists Bandera, otherwise known as OUN-B, and led by Stepan Bandera of the same name, began mass ethnic cleansing of Poles within Wallonia. Tens of thousands of Poles were killed, and their presence was essentially eradicated from the area. This one of many events did not occur in a vacuum, however. To greater understand the situation, we must look further back in time. The problems started long before this. In the Middle Ages, this territory of western Ukraine was part of the Kievan Rus. After the Mongols rode in and essentially destroyed the Confederation, this area lived on as a tributary successor state named the Kingdom of Galicia-Wallonia, from 1199 to the mid-1300s. Their history after this, however, would be intrinsically connected to that of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, until the partitions of Poland some 400 years later. As the centuries passed from the fall of the Rus kingdom, an antagonistic relationship developed between Poles and Galician Ruthenians. The nobility and landowner class largely comprised of ethnic Poles, while the field workers, serfs, and farmers were for the most part Ruthenian. Towns such as Lviv were also primarily populated by Poles, the Galician natives being stuck to that of the rural areas of the territory. There is no better example of this tension simmering over and being exploited than that of the Galician slaughter in 1846. The Szlachta, or Polish noble class of the land, had been plotting an uprising against the Austrian government, something that Vienna could not allow. Even though these nobles expressed their desire to improve the life of the Ruthenian peasants, this seemingly didn't matter. The Austrians used the anger from Galician peasants' history of being serfs and their desire for revenge to destroy the Polish independence movement within the area, encouraging peasants to revolt and slaughter any nobles they came across. 1,000 estates and more than twice that of nobles were mercilessly killed by the peasants. All of this is to say that the relationship between the two peoples were not the greatest. Post-World War II, and with the control of Poland by the USSR, many problems still remained in the territory. Chief among them was the units of the Ukrainian insurgent army fighting against both the Soviets and Poles within southeastern Poland and eastern Galicia, claiming parts of the new Polish state as rightfully Ukrainian land, as well as fighting off the communist government. Just a note here. The claiming of Lemkovyna was largely a solely Ukrainian move, as most Lemkos had no desire to join the Ukrainian SSR or fight alongside them. The Ukrainian insurgent army continued to battle with Polish and Soviet forces well into 1945 and 46, crossing the border illegally, killing Polish generals, getting into firefights with squads of troops. It was a big deal at the time. So, Moscow, seeking to end these issues, enacted a plan. Yes, you heard that right. The operation was coordinated from Moscow, while being carried out by Polish troops from the parts within Poland. First, on the Ukrainian side, Soviet troops rounded up suspected UPA members and their families, then deported them to Siberia. These deportees lived in incredibly harsh conditions, with most of them receiving no shelter or money to support themselves. Due to this, many of these people died. On the Polish side, things were comparatively less severe. While Lemko-Rusins and a small subset of Ukrainians further north of them were mass deported from their homelands, most received houses formerly occupied by Germans who had been deported before them in the recovered territories. The scars of this portrayal by the Polish government are still visible within the Lemko-Rusyn community to the present day. Without a homeland and now being scattered about throughout western Poland, over the decades the Lemko identity began to fade. In the last national census, only 11,000 declared themselves to be Lemko, a far cry from the over 100,000 before the deportations. Since 1990, however, Lemkos and their culture have had a resurgence like other Rusyn groups. We can only hope this trend continues into the future. If you would like to learn more about Akcja Wisła, I encourage you to check out Even Tears Were Not Enough by Maria Silvestri and John Righetti. The full documentary is on the Timo Foundation's YouTube channel. I will also have a link to it in the description below. Thank you, and have a nice day.